The wind was sharp that morning, biting, restless and fast. It tugged at Mia's coat as she stood at the edge of the cracked sidewalk, one hand gripping the strap of her backpack, the other holding the handle of the cat carrier, tucked safely against her side. Inside, her calico cat, Nala, gave a soft meow, blinking up at her with sleepy golden eyes. The early sun hadn't yet burned the frost off the pavement, and the street was still quiet, save for the distant rumble of the city waking up. Mia glanced down the road. The bus was late, again. She was used to this part, the waiting, the cold, the way people gave her sideways glances when they passed. Even now, a man in a suit across the street looked her way, did a quick scan. Black girl, hoodie under a jacket, heavy bag, a pet. He didn't smile, he didn't nod, he simply turned away, like she didn't exist. Mia tightened her grip on Nala's carrier. This wasn't new. At 16, she had already learned that the world didn't always look kindly on girls like her. Too quiet, too black, too invisible until the moment someone decided she was a problem. The bus finally came around the corner, grimy blue and white, screeching a little too loudly as it pulled up. The doors wheezed open with the usual metallic groan. She stepped inside, the sudden warmth of the bus hitting her face, fogging up her glasses. The driver didn't greet her. His face was flat, expressionless, but his eyes locked instantly onto the cat carrier. Mia said nothing. She knew the rules. Small animals in carriers were allowed. She had checked 3 times before leaving the house. She moved down the aisle, past tired workers, students with earbuds, a mother rocking a child. She slid into a seat near the back and set the carrier on her lap. Nala meowed again, soft, curious, harmless. The bus moved, but something wasn't right. Mia felt it before it happened. The driver kept looking back at her in the mirror, first once, then again, then longer. She tried not to meet his eyes, but she could feel the weight of his stare pressing into her like cold steel. The bus came to a sudden stop, jolting everyone forward. The brakes hissed loud and hard. Everyone looked up. The driver stood, eyes fixed on her. "You!" he barked. "Get off! No pets allowed!" Mia blinked, confused. "She's in a carrier. It's allowed. I checked." "I said get off!" he growled, louder this time. "You're holding up the bus." "No, I'm not," she said, voice shaky but steady. "She's not bothering anyone." Now everyone was watching. Dozens of eyes turned toward her, some annoyed, some curious, none sympathetic. "You people always have an excuse," the driver muttered. Her heart skipped a beat. You people. There it was, not loud, not shouted, just slipped out like it belonged, like it was ordinary. Mia's breath caught in her throat. She knew what he meant. She felt the air shift. The mother rocking her baby looked away. A teenage boy snickered and shook his head. The driver took a step toward her. "You're not special. I don't care whose cat that is. This is my bus. And I'm not driving another inch with that thing on board." Nala meowed again, sensing the tension. Mia's face burned with embarrassment. Her hands shook, but she held the carrier close. "This is wrong," she said, barely above a whisper. "Off, now!" The doors hissed open. Cold air rushed in like a slap. For a second, no one moved. No one helped. No one said a word. Mia stood up. She felt 100 things at once, rage, shame, the sting of tears that she refused to let fall. She moved past the rows of silent passengers, past the eyes that refused to meet hers. She stepped out into the wind with her head held high, even though everything inside her felt shattered. The bus doors slammed shut behind her, and the engine roared. As it pulled away, she saw the driver glance back in the mirror, smirking. Mia stood there on the sidewalk, frozen, her cat trembling in the carrier. And the only thought running through her head was, he has no idea who I am. Not yet. But he would. The cold felt heavier now, not just in the air, but in Mia's chest. She stood on the curb, her fingers numb around the handle of Nala's carrier, the wind cutting against her cheeks. The bus disappeared down the road, swallowing the last traces of the moment into the city's morning noise. But the sting of it remained, sharp, hot, burning under her skin. People passed her. A few looked, most didn't. Not one stopped. She blinked hard, trying to push back the tears gathering in her eyes. Not here. Not like this. She wouldn't give the world the satisfaction. She wouldn't cry for a man who thought he could toss her aside like she was trash on his route. But even still, her legs trembled. The humiliation clung to her like smoke. You people always have an excuse. She could still hear his voice, see his face, the way he had looked at her. Not like a child, not like a human being, but like an inconvenience, a disruption to his perfect little schedule. The cruelest part wasn't just the driver, it was the silence from the others. Grown men and women who had sat there, seen everything, and did nothing, not even a single word. That silence had screamed louder than his voice. It said, "You're alone, you don't matter, we agree, even if we won't say it." Mia adjusted the carrier and started walking. She had no choice. Her school wasn't far, but every step felt heavier than the last. The humiliation still pulsed like a bruise in her chest. She wasn't just carrying her books and her cat, she was dragging shame behind her, heavy and loud. The stairs hadn't stopped either. At the next intersection, an older white woman stepped aside with a noticeable grimace as Mia approached. Her eyes flicked to the carrier. "Filthy to bring animals into the street like that," the woman muttered under her breath, just loud enough for Mia to hear. Mia turned her head slowly. "She's cleaner than most people," she said softly, refusing to raise her voice. The woman scoffed and walked faster, her purse clutched tighter. "You people." It echoed again in her mind. This wasn't new. Mia had grown up surrounded by coded looks, passive dismissal, and soft-toned discrimination. The kind you couldn't point at without being told you were imagining things. But this morning had ripped the mask right off, and now she couldn't stop seeing it everywhere. By the time she arrived at school, she was late. The security guard at the front gate frowned when he saw the carrier. "No pets allowed," he said flatly, already reaching for the walkie clipped to his belt. "It's for my anxiety," Mia said, the lie slipping out smooth, practiced. She knew the rules. She knew how to play the game. He paused. He looked her up and down. "Paperwork." "I have it on file in the office," she lied again. A pause. Then finally, he stepped aside. It wasn't approval. It was avoidance. He didn't care. She was just one more thing he didn't want to deal with. Mia didn't mind. Let them overlook her. She was used to it, and today it suited her just fine. She walked down the hallway toward her locker, shoulders tense under the stairs. The other students took notice of the carrier. Some smiled. A few whispered. And one, a boy from her math class, called out loud enough for the hall to hear, "Did your little street pet get you kicked off the short bus?" Laughter followed. Ugly, mean-spirited laughter that hit harder because no one stopped it. Mia paused at her locker, staring straight ahead. The laughter went on for a few seconds more, then faded. She said nothing. That was the only armor she had. Silence. If she reacted, if she flinched, they won. And she was tired of losing. At lunch, it happened again. Mia sat by herself, as usual, her tray untouched. Nala had been dropped off at the office for now, safe, but far from her. She stared at her food, her appetite gone, the events of the morning still fresh in her mind. Then she felt it, a nudge. She turned slowly. Behind her, a group of 3 girls, all from wealthy families, were grinning. "Must be nice," one of them said, her voice syrupy sweet. "To think you can just bring whatever you want onto public transportation. Don't they have rules about that?" "I think they do," another chimed in. "But I guess the rules don't apply when you're trying to act like someone you're not." They walked away laughing. Mia clenched her fists under the table. Someone you're not. That was the narrative they'd always crafted for people like her. The daughter of a black senator, she had lived between 2 worlds for as long as she could remember. In the halls of power, she was a polished legacy. In public, just another black girl they thought came from the wrong side of everything. The truth was they didn't hate who she was. They hated the idea that someone like her could exist in their world. And today, that hatred had a name. The bus driver. Mia's fingers tapped against the tray. She thought about her mother, Senator Daniels, who was likely in a meeting downtown right now, speaking about education or youth opportunity. Mia had never told her about these moments. Her mother had worked too hard to bring Mia into a world of opportunity. But that world still wasn't safe. Not really. She pulled out her phone, opened the camera, and stared at her reflection. Her dark eyes. Her natural hair pulled into a tight puff. Her expression unreadable. She didn't look like a victim. She looked like a storm waiting to happen. She opened a blank note on her phone and typed one line. "He doesn't know who I am." because he didn't, but he would. And so would the rest of them. Mia's breath slowed as she planned her next move. She wasn't going to yell. She wasn't going to cry. She wasn't going to plead for validation. She was going to show them exactly who she was. The senator's daughter, the girl with fire in her veins, the one they should never have tried to humiliate. Because Mia wasn't just another black girl with a cat. She was the spark in the wire they never saw coming. Mia walked home that evening with her hood up, the grey sky low and swollen, threatening rain. The world felt heavier than usual, not just on her back, but inside her chest. A weight pressed deep against her ribs. The humiliation from the bus lingered like a stain she couldn't scrub off. But worse than the moment itself was the realization that it wasn't isolated. It wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern, and she was tired of living inside it. She clutched the carrier with Nala, her fingers tight around the plastic handle. The weight of the cat was nothing compared to the weight of the silence she had carried all day. Her mother wasn't home yet. The large house was quiet, and Mia slipped inside without turning on the lights. She set the carrier down, opened it. Nala stretched and climbed onto the couch, as if sensing her girl needed peace. Mia didn't sit. She paced, back and forth. The hallway felt too narrow, the walls too close. Her mind was racing. She thought about the driver's face, the sneer in his voice. You people always have an excuse. The words scratched at the inside of her skull. And then the stares, the whispers. The lunchroom girls who mocked her, not because they didn't know her, but because they did, and hated the idea of a girl like her being in their world. Mia didn't cry. She didn't scream. She opened her laptop. She started typing. This morning, I was kicked off a public bus for bringing my cat to school. I had her in a closed carrier. She made no noise, broke no rules. But the driver looked at me and made a choice. He didn't see a girl. He saw a problem. And when I tried to explain, he told me to get off his bus. You people always have an excuse, he said. You people. I wasn't kicked off because of the cat. I was kicked off because of my skin, because of my hair, because I didn't look like the kind of girl he wanted sitting quietly on his bus. And maybe he didn't know who I am. Maybe he didn't know my mother is Senator Maya Daniels. But that's not the point. The point is, it shouldn't matter who I am. I shouldn't need a title behind my name to be treated like a human being. She paused. Her fingers hovered above the keyboard, and then she kept going. Mia poured it all out. Her anger, her shame, her quiet fury at a system that treated her as invisible unless she had power in her back pocket. The subtle racism she faced every day, the way people recoiled when she walked into a room with confidence. The boys who laughed when she spoke in class, then repeated her answers as if they were their own. The counselors who suggested less competitive colleges. The store clerks who followed her down aisles. The teachers who smiled at the white kids and called her articulate like it was a surprise. She didn't need sympathy. She wanted the truth out. She posted the story anonymously first, just to see what would happen. She clicked, publish. Then she closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling, her breath slow and steady. The next morning, her post had gone viral. It was everywhere. Shared on local blogs, retweeted by youth activists, reposted by university students and young black professionals across the country. Comments flooded in. Some were supportive. This is why we need to talk about systemic racism. Others were predictable. Stop playing the race card. But the story had struck a nerve. Because Mia hadn't just shared what happened, she named the feeling behind it. The feeling of being tolerated, not accepted. The feeling of being allowed, not welcomed. The feeling of always having to explain yourself. At school, it was chaos. The post had been screenshotted, circulated, whispered about in every hallway. No one knew who had written it, but everyone felt it. Even the teachers walked a little stiffer that day. By third period, a new rumor floated down the halls like wildfire. Mia Daniels wrote the post, and then it came, the pushback. In her history class, the teacher, a white man with an expensive watch and the voice of someone who had never been questioned, decided to make a point. I read that anonymous story going around, he said, hands behind his back, eyes scanning the room. It's unfortunate if it's true, but these days everyone's a victim, everyone's offended. Mia didn't speak, but she could feel every pair of eyes slowly shift in her direction. Sometimes, he added, people misinterpret discipline or rules as racism. It's important to know the difference. Mia looked up. Her voice came out low but sharp. "Did you read the whole post?" The teacher blinked. "Excuse me?" "Did you read all of it?" she repeated, louder this time. "I read enough to know that it's emotionally charged," he said, folding his arms. "But again, these stories often lack context." Mia felt the anger rise up like fire under her ribs. "So what's the context for being told you people always have an excuse?" she asked. The room went dead silent. The teacher fumbled. I don't know the details. I'm just saying..." "You're just saying I misunderstood racism," she said. He opened his mouth, then closed it. She turned back to her notebook, heart thudding. No one said a word, but everyone heard her. After class, she found 3 messages on her phone. One was from a classmate she barely knew, a white girl named Lauren. "I'm sorry that happened. I didn't say anything on the bus. I should have. I was scared, but I believe you." The second was from the principal's office. She had been called in. The third was from her mother. "Mia, I need to speak with you right now." At the principal's office, the walls were lined with framed quotes about respect, leadership, and dignity. Mia sat on a stiff chair as the principal, Mr. Dunley, tried to dance around the issue. "We've received some reports, Mia," he said, forcing a smile. "Some comments you may have made in class. Some accusations circulating online." "It's not an accusation," Mia said. "It's the truth." "I understand that you feel that way," he replied quickly, in the voice adults use to smooth over a crack in the glass. "But these things can escalate quickly. I just want to be sure that you're not bringing unnecessary attention." "Unnecessary attention." Mia nearly laughed. "I was kicked off a bus for being black and having a cat," she said flatly. "And you're worried about attention?" "There are proper channels," he said, shifting uncomfortably. "Protocols, complaints to the transit board. Making it public only complicates things." "For who?" she asked. "For me? Or for the people who don't want to be held accountable?" He didn't answer. That night, the article made national news. A journalist picked it up, connected the dots, and published a headline that rattled the internet. "Black teen kicked off city bus. Driver didn't know she was a senator's daughter." Now everyone knew her name. But Mia didn't feel vindicated. She felt exposed. The interviews began almost instantly. Local papers, news stations, podcasts. Everyone wanted a quote, a headline, a soundbite. But few wanted the truth. They wanted the senator's daughter. The girl who'd gone viral. Not the girl who was still being mocked at lunch, still whispered about in class, still doubted by the same adults who claimed to support her. She wasn't a hero. She was just a girl who got sick of being invisible, and now they couldn't look away. Let's take a brief pause here. We'd love to hear from you. Where are you listening to our story from? Has anything like this happened to you before? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. And if you're enjoying the journey so far, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. Now, let's continue. The following days felt like a blur, a constant churn of headlines, interviews, and social media posts. Mia had always been aware of the subtle ways the world pushed her to the margins. But now, with the attention focused squarely on her, it felt different. It felt louder, and it felt like every moment was being watched by eyes that didn't care to understand. Her story, the one that had started as an innocent expression of frustration, was now being dissected, analyzed, and twisted in every possible direction. The headlines were a mix of sympathy and skepticism. Teen kicked off bus, the power of a name, and senator's daughter and her cat, a city divided. The news outlets didn't know what to do with her. They didn't know whether to portray her as a victim or as a troublemaker. Some painted her as a naive girl who didn't understand the consequences of speaking out, while others tried to turn her into a symbol of resistance, a hero, a martyr. But Mia wasn't any of those things. She was just a girl trying to survive a world that wasn't designed for people like her. Each morning as she walked to school, she could feel the eyes on her, the whispers, the stares, the subtle but sharp judgment that followed her every step. She couldn't escape it. It wasn't just the classmates she had always known. It was everyone, the teachers, the custodians, the lunch staff, even the people on the street who didn't know her but recognized her name from the news. Her mother, Senator Maya Daniels, had called her several times, asking if she was okay. Mia appreciated the concern, but she could hear the worry in her mother's voice. It wasn't just the public scrutiny that bothered her. It was the fact that Mia had put herself at the center of a storm that could have consequences. Consequences that Mia wasn't even sure she could handle. "Mum, I'm fine," Mia would say. "I can deal with it." But deep down, she wasn't sure if she could. Her world at school had turned upside down. Where she once quietly walked the halls, now everyone was aware of her. The whispered comments were louder, more frequent, and more venomous. At lunch, she sat alone as always, but it felt different now. The air was thicker. People looked at her like she was a spectacle, a thing to gawk at, but not touch, a girl who'd stepped out of line, a girl who had dared to speak up. One day during fifth period, a girl named Jessica from her history class, one of the more popular students, came up to her with a wide smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mia, right?" she said, her voice a little too bright, too sugary. "You're the girl who got kicked off the bus. I saw your post. It's really brave. I mean, standing up for yourself like that. I don't know if I would have been that brave, honestly." Mia looked up at her, confused. She didn't know Jessica very well. They had never spoken before. "I don't need your pity," Mia replied, her tone sharp. "You don't have to pretend to care. I'm not some inspiration for you to feel better about yourself." Jessica blinked, clearly taken aback. "I wasn't. No, I thought." "Just stop," Mia said, standing up. "Don't act like you're doing me a favor. If you really wanted to help, you'd do something. But all I hear from people like you is, 'That's so brave,' or 'good for you.' Like my pain is just some cute story you can tell your friends." Jessica's face faltered, but Mia didn't give her a chance to respond. She turned and walked out of the cafeteria, her steps loud in the suddenly silent room. As she left, Mia realized that the world had changed around her, but nothing inside her had shifted. She hadn't asked for any of this. She hadn't asked to be put in the position of being a symbol, a representative of an entire movement. But now that's exactly what she had become. The token black girl who was brave enough to speak out. The one who had the audacity to claim her voice and demand dignity, even when it wasn't offered. That afternoon, Mia received an unexpected message. It wasn't from anyone she knew. It was an anonymous message in her inbox, sent through social media. "You're a disgrace to this city. You think because your mum is a senator, you can do whatever you want. You're no different from the rest of us. Don't think we don't know who you are. You think you're so special, don't you? We'll see how long your little movement lasts." Mia stared at the words. Her chest tightened with an unsettling mix of fear and anger. It wasn't the first time someone had threatened her. It wouldn't be the last. But the words stung because they weren't just an insult. They were a reminder. A reminder that no matter what she achieved, no matter how much power her family had, she would always be seen as other. She would always be seen as less than. Her hands shook as she deleted the message, but the damage was already done. It was as if the hatred she had been trying to avoid her entire life had finally found its target, and now there was no escaping it. Later that evening, Mia's mother called again. "Are you okay, Mia?" Senator Daniels' voice was calm, but Mia could hear the stress underneath. "I saw the message, the one online. We'll take care of it. Don't worry." "I don't want you to fix this for me, Mom," Mia said, her voice tight. "I don't need you to step in every time someone says something. I can handle it. I've been handling it." "You don't have to handle it alone," her mother replied gently. "You're not alone in this fight. We're here. I'm here." Mia closed her eyes, pressing the phone tighter against her ear. She could hear the love in her mother's voice, the desperation to protect her, but it felt suffocating. She didn't want to be protected. She didn't want to be sheltered. She just wanted to be seen, truly seen, for who she was, not who they expected her to be. "Mom," Mia said softly, "I know you're trying to protect me, but this isn't just your fight. It's mine." There was a long silence before her mother spoke again. "I know," she said, her voice filled with a quiet understanding, "but it's my job to make sure you don't have to fight alone." The next day, Mia's story made the rounds again, this time amplified. The local news picked it up. Her story became a flashpoint for the ongoing discussion about race, class, and the subtle ways that power and privilege controlled who got to exist in certain spaces. Some called her a hero. Others called her a troublemaker. But Mia didn't feel like either. She felt like she was caught in the middle of a storm that had no end in sight. The school, the bus, the teacher, it was all just pieces of a much larger puzzle, The world she was fighting to change wasn't just out there. It was everywhere. Inside every interaction, every glance, every subtle insult that people like her were expected to tolerate without question. The driver from the bus still hadn't been identified. The city had launched an investigation into the incident, but Mia knew it would go nowhere. The system wasn't designed to punish people like him. It was designed to protect people like him. But that didn't matter to her anymore. She wasn't fighting for the bus driver's job. She wasn't fighting for the respect of the people who mocked her. She was fighting for something bigger, for the future, for every black girl who would come after her, for every person who would be silenced until they had the courage to speak up. Mia sat in her room, looking at the messages of support, the emails from strangers who said they were inspired by her bravery. Some told her to keep fighting. Others warned her to back down before things got worse. She read them all. But in the end, Mia knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stop. She had already stepped into the fire, and now she would make sure it burned bright enough for everyone to see. The fight had only just begun. Mia woke up to the sound of her phone buzzing incessantly, the noise sharp and persistent. The screen lit up with notifications, each one more urgent than the last. Her post about the bus incident, which had started as an attempt to voice her frustration, had spiraled out of control. It was no longer just a story about one unjust experience. It was a national conversation, and now the people who had dismissed her for so long were watching. She sat up in bed, running a hand over her face, trying to shake off the exhaustion that weighed down her every bone. She had barely slept. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the look on the bus driver's face, the disdain, the disgust that had been aimed at her, and she couldn't stop the sting from resurfacing. Even now, in the quiet of her room, she felt as though she was being watched, judged, dissected. What if I've made a mistake? Mia thought. What if I've gone too far? But no matter how many times she asked herself that question, the answer remained the same. No, I haven't. She couldn't let this go. Not when it was about more than just her. It was about everyone who had been silenced, ignored, humiliated, because they didn't fit someone else's idea of what was acceptable. Mia wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for the countless others who never had the chance, who couldn't speak for fear of losing even more than they already had. She checked her phone again. There were texts from her mother, each one filled with concern, calls from reporters, emails from strangers offering support, and from others sending her threats, telling her to back down or risk making things worse. One message stood out. It was from Jessica, the girl who had mocked her in the lunchroom days ago. Mia, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I didn't get it. I've been watching the posts and reading everything. I didn't mean to hurt you. I can't imagine what you've been going through. I hope you'll accept my apology. Mia stared at the screen, unsure of how to respond. It felt strange to hear someone who had been part of the problem apologize. Had Jessica really changed? Mia didn't know. She wasn't sure if she cared. At school, Mia was met with the same cold stares. Her classmates hadn't stopped talking about her. The whispers and looks felt like daggers. Some were supportive, some were not. But there was no middle ground anymore. Mia had drawn a line, and now people were forced to choose a side. Her first class was history with Mr. Harrington. When she walked in, she felt the tension hit her immediately. The whispers were louder now, more pronounced. As she sat down in her usual spot, she noticed the way some students shifted uncomfortably, looking away when they saw her. The ones who used to chat with her in the halls now pretended they didn't see her. The silence was a sharp contrast to the loud noises that had filled the classroom the day before. Mr. Harrington stepped in front of the class, and for a second, Mia thought maybe, just maybe, he would say something about the situation. He had always been a bit more understanding than the others, so she held out hope that he might address the issue of racism or the lack of compassion that had been on display. But he didn't. Instead, he simply announced that they would be discussing the causes of civil unrest in the 1960s. Mia's stomach twisted. She knew what was coming. As the lesson continued, Mr. Harrington spoke in vague terms, as he often did. His voice lacked conviction, and it was clear to Mia that he was trying to avoid the uncomfortable topic, the one that connected the past to the present, the one that might have made the students reflect on their own behavior. She could feel her frustration growing, her palms sweating. Then the turning point came. He asked the class to discuss modern movements for racial equality, but Mia could feel the weight of the question hanging there, unanswered, like an elephant in the room. Some students shifted in their seats, glancing nervously at her. Others snickered under their breath. No one spoke. Finally, Mia raised her hand. The room went silent. "Mr. Harrington," she said, her voice calm but unyielding, "why don't we talk about what's happening now? Why don't we talk about how people like me are still treated? You're asking us to talk about a history we've barely even studied, but we live in a world where racism is still alive and well. People like me, black people, are still being humiliated, kicked off buses, denied basic dignity. Isn't that a conversation we should be having?" The class went deathly quiet. She could feel the eyes on her, heavy and uncomfortable. She didn't care. She couldn't care anymore. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Mr. Harrington looked at her, his face flickering with uncertainty. He didn't know what to say, but the moment stretched long, and in that moment, Mia realized something. He didn't want to say anything at all. It wasn't that he was scared to engage in the conversation. It was that he had no intention of going deeper into it. It was easier for him to stay comfortable, to keep things as they were. His silence wasn't a moment of reflection. It was a refusal to confront the truth. Mia felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She didn't need him to stand up for her. She didn't need anyone to do anything except recognize that she was speaking the truth. And then, like clockwork, someone in the back of the room piped up. It was Aaron, the class clown who had always worn his privilege like a badge of honor. He was a rich, white kid, loud and boisterous, and often the first one to make jokes at others' expense. "Come on, Mia," Aaron said, his voice oozing with mockery. "You don't honestly think your little post is going to change anything, do you? This is high school. If you can't take a little joke, you're in the wrong place." The laughter followed immediately. A few of the kids in the class chuckled at Aaron's comment, and Mia felt the sting of it. There it was, the blatant disregard, the casual racism wrapped in the cloak of humor, the kind that so many people, especially white people, passed off as harmless. But Mia was done pretending she didn't hear it, done pretending it didn't hurt. Aaron's words were just another reminder that no matter how many times she spoke out, no matter how much attention her post had gotten, she would always be seen as the angry, unreasonable black girl, the girl who had stepped out of line, the girl who was too loud, too persistent, too visible. Mia stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the floor. "I'm not going to sit here and let you or anyone else tell me what I'm allowed to be angry about. Not anymore," she said, her voice rising. The class fell silent. Mr. Harrington shifted awkwardly. "Mia, I think we need to talk about this after class." "No," she interrupted. "I'm done talking. I'm not going to wait around for people to decide whether or not my pain is valid." She turned and walked out of the classroom, the heavy sound of her footsteps resonating down the hallway. She didn't care about the whispers that followed her, the judgment in their eyes. She had made her choice. She wasn't going to let them silence her anymore. She wasn't going to let the world walk over her, pretend that her experience didn't matter. As she walked, she thought about the bus driver, about the other people who had ignored her, about the world that had failed to teach their children empathy. She didn't need them to care anymore. She didn't need their approval, but she would make them listen. She would make them see her, whether they liked it or not. And this was just the beginning. The day after walking out of history class, Mia could feel the weight of her decisions settling in her chest like a stone. The whispers had followed her down the halls, lingering in every corner of the school like shadows. It wasn't just her classmates who were talking. Now the teachers, the staff, even the administrators were discussing her. Not her grades, not her participation, but the incident. Everyone had an opinion. The school had responded quickly, as expected. An emergency assembly was scheduled with the principal, Mr. Dunley, at the helm. His usual polished demeanor now carried an edge of nervousness. He wasn't concerned about the incident itself. He was concerned about the optics. He wanted to appear in control, like a leader, but Mia knew that his fear was palpable. Fear of how this would reflect on the school's reputation. Fear of being painted as an institution that allowed things like racism to fester in its halls. Mia wasn't surprised. She had seen it all before. People who were more concerned with their image than with confronting the real issues. The system wasn't designed to protect her. It was designed to protect itself. That afternoon, she sat through the assembly, sitting at the back, her arms crossed, her eyes locked on the floor. Mr. Dunley's speech was the same rehearsed one he had given a dozen times, safe, neutral, and unhelpful. "Students," he began, his voice booming through the microphone, "we are a school that values respect, inclusivity, and understanding. We do not tolerate any form of discrimination. We want to ensure that all students feel safe, seen, and heard." He paused for effect, his eyes sweeping across the room, landing on Mia for just a second. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She didn't care if she was the center of attention anymore. The truth was, she had never felt less safe in her life. "We will be investigating the incident that occurred on the bus. It is important that we all learn from this experience and ensure that we treat each other with kindness and respect," Mr. Dunley continued. Mia didn't need to hear the rest. She could feel the underlying message. He wasn't concerned with justice. He was concerned with covering his own back, making sure that nothing would disrupt the school's carefully crafted image. The rest of the assembly was a blur of meaningless platitudes. Mia didn't hear most of it. Her mind was elsewhere, focusing on the sound of the whispers that filled the room, the way people looked at her like she had caused some kind of disruption in their peaceful lives. She could feel the weight of their judgment, heavier than the spotlight on her now. As the bell rang and the students filtered out, Mia stayed seated, the room gradually emptying. A few seconds later, a voice broke through the silence. "Mia!" She looked up to see her counselor, Mrs. Jenkins, standing by the door. Mrs. Jenkins was one of the few adults at the school who had ever shown real interest in Mia, who had treated her like an individual rather than a problem to manage. She was tall, with warm eyes and a calm demeanor, always speaking to her students like they were equals. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Mrs. Jenkins asked softly. Mia nodded, gathering her things slowly. She didn't know what this conversation would be about, but she couldn't help the anxiety gnawing at her stomach. The last thing she wanted was to feel like she was being lectured on how to handle the situation. Once they were alone in the quiet office, Mrs. Jenkins gestured for Mia to sit down. She sat across from her, her hands folded on the desk, her gaze steady but compassionate. "I know things have been difficult for you lately," Mrs. Jenkins began, "and I want you to know that I'm here for you. I've seen the way you've been treated, and I understand why you felt the need to speak out." Mia nodded, trying not to look as vulnerable as she felt. She was tired of pretending that everything was fine, tired of being strong for the sake of others. She wanted someone, anyone, to just see her, to understand the weight she carried. "You've always been quiet, Mia," Mrs. Jenkins continued, "but I've noticed something in you lately. There's a fire, a strength, and it's been hard for some people to understand that." Mia's breath caught. A fire. It was the same way her mother used to describe her when she was younger. The spark that could never be extinguished, no matter how many times life tried to dampen it. "Do you think I'm wrong?" Mia asked suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you think I went too far? I'm just so tired of this, of pretending, of being treated like I'm invisible unless I fit into their idea of what's acceptable." Mrs. Jenkins shook her head. "No, Mia, you did what you had to do. It's not wrong to speak your truth. It's not wrong to demand respect, but I want you to be careful. Not everyone will see it the way we do. Not everyone will be supportive." "I know," Mia said bitterly. "I can feel it. I feel the looks every time I walk into a room. I hear the whispers. I've always felt like I had to work harder, be better, just to be seen as equal. But it's never enough. It will never be enough." Mrs. Jenkins sighed, her eyes softening with empathy. "I understand, Mia, and that's why you have to keep going. This fight, this journey, isn't just about you. It's about everyone who's ever been told they didn't belong. Everyone who's ever had to prove their worth over and over again. You're not alone in this. You never were." Mia swallowed hard, trying to push back the tears threatening to spill. She wasn't used to talking about her feelings. She wasn't used to admitting that she was struggling, but the weight of it all had become too much to bear. "I don't want to be the angry black girl," she said quietly. "I don't want people to think that's all I am." Mrs. Jenkins smiled gently. "Mia, you're not the angry black girl. You're a young woman who's been pushed down for far too long, and now you're standing up. And that's something we need more of. Don't let anyone define you by their terms. Define yourself." Mia nodded, feeling the weight in her chest ease just a little. She had heard similar words from her mother, but there was something about hearing them from Mrs. Jenkins, someone who wasn't her family. Something about hearing it from someone who wasn't caught up in the politics of it all that made it feel real. "Thank you," Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I would do without people like you." "You don't need to thank me," Mrs. Jenkins said, standing up. "You're stronger than you know. Now go home, rest. Don't let them wear you down. Tomorrow is another day." That night, as Mia lay in bed, her phone buzzed again. Another message, another wave of words, some kind, some cruel. But this time, Mia didn't feel like she was drowning in them. This time, she felt something different. She had been seen. Her voice had been heard. The world wasn't going to silence her anymore. She opened the message. It was from Jessica, the girl who had mocked her so recently. But this time, the message was different. "I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't understand then, but I do now. I see you, and I'm with you." Mia stared at the screen for a long time, her fingers hovering over the keyboard. The words felt strange, unexpected. But after everything she'd been through, the last thing Mia wanted was to shut down someone who had the courage to apologize, to admit they were wrong. She took a deep breath and typed back, "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." She put the phone down and closed her eyes, the weight of the day finally lifting from her shoulders. Tomorrow would be another fight, but Mia was ready, and this time, she wasn't going to fight alone. The next day, Mia walked into school with a new resolve. The whispers still followed her, the stares still burned, but she didn't care anymore. She had found her voice. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. She was fighting for the future. The days after the assembly were a blur of tension. Mia had expected things to settle, for the storm to calm, but it didn't. If anything, it only intensified. Her story had gone beyond the school and the city. Now it was national news. Articles were written. Discussions on social media erupted. Some cheered her on, calling her brave, while others labelled her entitled, a troublemaker who was trying to bring attention to herself. The divisions were stark, like the harsh black and white of a photo that never developed properly. Mia had been thrust into a place she never asked for, and now she wasn't sure how to navigate it. At school, the energy had shifted. The students who had once ignored her were now speaking to her, some out of curiosity, some out of guilt, but mostly because the world had told them to. They had been given a choice, align with her or turn their backs. Mia noticed the subtle glances, the attempts at small talk, the forced smiles. She had become an object of fascination, not a person. The whispers behind her back felt sharper now, sharper and more deliberate. It wasn't just her peers, it was the teachers too. As Mia walked down the hall to her next class, she overheard one of her teachers, Mrs. Clark, speaking to another teacher. "It's a shame, Mrs." Clark said in a voice just loud enough for Mia to hear. "What's happening in this school? A girl like her, dragging us all into her drama." Mia stopped in her tracks, a cold rush of anger surging through her. She knew they were talking about her. She didn't need to ask. The way Mrs. Clark said "a girl like her" made it clear. Mia was the problem, not the bus driver, not the system, not the institution that allowed this kind of treatment. No, it was Mia, the one who dared to demand respect. She wanted to turn around and confront Mrs. Clark, to shout at her, to make her understand. But she didn't. Instead, Mia took a deep breath and kept walking. If she didn't walk away, if she didn't keep her head up, the world would win. She wasn't going to let that happen. That afternoon, Mia's phone buzzed with a message from her mum. The text was short, but Mia could feel the weight of her mother's words. "Mia, I need to talk to you when you get home. It's important." Mia felt her stomach knot. She already knew what it was about. Her mother had seen the headlines. She had heard the whispers. It wasn't just the school anymore. It was the media, the people she had worked alongside for years. Everyone had an opinion. Everyone was watching. When Mia arrived home, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, her face grim, her fingers wrapped around a mug of tea. The house was quiet, as it often was when her mother was home late from work, when she was preparing for some big meeting, some event that Mia could never quite understand. But today, there was no business in the air, just tension. "Sit down, Mia," her mother said softly, her voice carefully controlled. Mia sat across from her, the weight of her mother's gaze heavy on her. "What is it, Mum?" Mia asked, her voice low, almost nervous. Her mother looked at her for a moment, as if weighing her words. "There's been a lot of backlash," she said slowly. "You know that, don't you?" Mia nodded. She had felt it, the weight of the world crashing down on her, people speaking behind her back, the whispers, the judgments. "I've spoken to some of your teachers, and there are concerns about how this is affecting your schooling. Some of them think it's disruptive," her mother continued, her tone strained. "Some even suggested that you might need to take a break, take some time off from school." Mia's eyes widened, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Time off, to retreat, to let this story die down. She stood up suddenly, the chair scraping harshly against the floor. "No," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm not going to hide. Not for them. Not for anyone." Her mother sighed, standing up as well. "Mia, I know you want to stand up for what's right. I know this is important to you, but you have to understand. This isn't just about you anymore. You're not just a student at this school anymore. You're a symbol now, and symbols can be dangerous." Mia shook her head, her chest tightening. "I'm not a symbol, Mom. I'm just me. I'm not doing this for anyone else. I'm doing this for myself." Her mother's expression softened, but only slightly. "I understand that, sweetie, but I want you to be careful. You don't know what they can do. You don't know what the people in power can do when they're threatened." Mia bit her lip, struggling to keep the tears at bay. Her mother didn't get it. She didn't get what it was like to walk through life constantly being told you don't belong. She didn't understand how it felt to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be humiliated for something as simple as existing. "I'm not afraid of them," Mia said, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of anything anymore." Her mother took a deep breath. "Mia, you don't have to fight this alone. I'm here. We'll handle it together." But Mia didn't feel like fighting together was an option. She felt alone in this. She had always felt alone in this fight. Her mother's power, her influence, none of it mattered in moments like this. Mia had to find her own strength, her own voice, or it wouldn't mean anything. "I don't need anyone to fix it for me," Mia said, turning away from her mother. "I can handle this." The next day, Mia faced a new level of humiliation. Her first class was interrupted by the principal, Mr. Dunley. He walked into the room with a polite smile, but Mia could tell it was forced. She knew what was coming. The other students in the room shifted uncomfortably, glancing between her and Mr. Dunley. "Mia," he said, addressing her directly in front of the class, "the administration has decided to take further action regarding your recent actions. As part of an ongoing investigation into the incident, we'd like you to attend a meeting this afternoon to discuss how we can address these concerns." Mia's stomach twisted. The concerns had nothing to do with the bus incident. It had nothing to do with fairness or justice. It had everything to do with the disruption to their perfect system. The students looked at her with a mixture of pity and judgment. No one said anything, but the silence was deafening. Mia stood up, her chest tight, but she didn't let her gaze fall to the floor. She wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. "I'll attend the meeting," she said, her voice steady, though inside she felt like her heart was pounding in her ears. She wasn't going to let them drag her into a room to justify her right to exist. She wouldn't let them make her feel small again. Mr. Dunley nodded, his expression blank. "I'll see you then, Mia. I hope you understand that this is a necessary step. We need to ensure that everyone is treated equally." Mia nodded once, tightly, and walked out of the classroom. She didn't wait for anyone to follow her gaze. She didn't care what anyone else thought. When she arrived at the meeting, she was met with the usual empty formalities, the same cold faces of administrators who had no interest in hearing her side. They asked her questions about what had happened on the bus, as if they hadn't already made up their minds. They were more interested in managing the fallout than in understanding the truth. "You've caused quite an uproar," one of them, Mr. Foster, said in a thinly veiled accusation. "We've received complaints from several staff members about your behavior. It's disrupting the school's environment." "I wasn't the one who caused the disruption," Mia said quietly, but firmly. "The disruption happened the moment I stepped on that bus. I wasn't given the choice to stay invisible anymore." The room fell silent. Mr. Foster shifted uncomfortably. Mia could see the tension on their faces, the realization that they were dealing with someone who wasn't going to bend, someone who wasn't going to apologize for demanding her basic rights. "You don't get it, mister," Foster said, his voice tinged with frustration. "This isn't about what's right or wrong. It's about what's appropriate. Your actions have consequences." Mia stood up, her hands clenched at her sides. "The only consequence I see is that people like me are always asked to sit quietly in the back and never question what's happening. Well, I won't stay quiet anymore. And if you can't accept that, then maybe you're the ones who need to reconsider how you're treating your students." With that, she turned and walked out of the room, leaving the stunned silence behind her. She had made her stand, and now she was ready to fight for the future, her future, and the future of every other person who had been silenced for too long. The walls might be closing in, but Mia had finally found her voice. And this time, she wasn't going to let anyone take it away. The days following the meeting felt like a slow unraveling. Mia had walked out of that room with a new sense of resolve, but the weight of the aftermath was starting to press down on her in ways she hadn't fully anticipated. The atmosphere at school had changed again. It wasn't just the whispers now. It was the open hostility, the looks of disdain from students who once pretended to be her friends, the teachers who could barely meet her gaze. They hadn't stopped to think about why Mia was speaking out, or what it meant for someone like her to use her voice. No, it was easier to blame her for disrupting the peace, for asking questions that made them uncomfortable. It had started small at first, students avoiding her in the hallways, conversations stopping the moment she walked into a room. But then it escalated. The racist comments became more frequent, more blatant, and it wasn't just from the students anymore. One afternoon during lunch, Mia sat at her usual spot, the empty space around her a reminder of how far she had fallen from the group. She had always been a quiet student, the kind of person who blended into the background. But now, she couldn't go anywhere without feeling the sting of judgment. It was a simple comment at first, one that Mia barely heard, but it hit its mark. "Can you believe she's still here?" someone muttered, loud enough for Mia to hear. "Like she owns the place or something." Mia's fingers tightened around the edge of her tray. She turned slightly, catching sight of a group of boys from her class. They didn't even try to hide the contempt in their eyes, the way they looked at her like she was something to be dismissed. "Someone should teach her a lesson," one of them said, his voice dripping with disdain. "No one cares about her stupid little post. She's just looking for attention." The words were meant to sting, and they did. Mia had heard them before. She had heard them in whispers on the bus, at the store, in the classroom. The same tired lines, the same dismissal of her reality. But hearing it now, from people who used to smile at her in the hallways, felt like a blow to the gut. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stood up, pushing her tray aside. But before she could gather her things and leave, another voice cut through the noise. "You think this is funny?" It was Lauren, the same girl who had apologized to her weeks ago, the one who had mocked her at lunch, but who now stood up, looking directly at the boys. "You think this is all just a joke? Do you even hear yourselves? You don't get to treat her like this." Lauren had always been the popular one, the girl who seemed to have it all. But there was something different in her eyes today, something that had shifted, something Mia wasn't sure she understood. She had never expected Lauren to step up for her, not in a million years. The boys looked taken aback, but it wasn't enough. They sneered, dismissing Lauren's words. "Who are you to talk, Lauren?" one of them said, his voice rising in arrogance. "You know she's just trying to make herself a victim. Don't get sucked into her drama." Mia could feel the heat rise in her chest. She wasn't sure whether it was anger or exhaustion, but she could feel herself becoming more and more distant from everything around her. She didn't need anyone's pity. She didn't need their validation, but the fact that they still saw her as less, as a problem, only made her more determined to change it. Lauren, standing tall, took a deep breath. "It's not drama," she said, her voice unwavering. "It's real. This kind of thing happens every single day, and you just ignore it because it doesn't affect you." Mia watched as the group of boys exchanged glances, their smug expressions faltering, just for a moment. It was the smallest victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. But Mia couldn't stay there. She couldn't sit and pretend that things would magically improve. She needed to walk away, needed to breathe and think for herself. She grabbed her things and left without a word, walking down the hallway, her footsteps echoing in the empty space around her. The school administration had tried to downplay the situation, but it was no longer something they could ignore. Parents began calling, complaining about the disruption Mia's story was causing. Others, mostly parents of white students, expressed concern that their children were being subjected to unnecessary politics and divisive rhetoric. The calls grew louder. Mia had become a lightning rod. They were all watching her now, waiting for her to falter, waiting for her to back down, so they could tell her she was wrong, that she should have known her place. It wasn't long before the principal called Mia into his office again. Mr. Dunley's office felt like a tomb. He looked at her, his gaze cold, calculating. Behind him, a secretary hovered by the door, ready to step in if needed. Mia had a feeling this meeting wasn't going to be about her education. Mia, he started, his tone stern. We've been receiving complaints about your behavior. Your actions are creating a divide in the student body. Your post has made things more difficult than they need to be. Mia didn't flinch. She was used to this by now. She knew what was coming. What exactly are you saying? Mia asked, her voice steady, refusing to let him see the fear that still lingered. Are you going to suspend me? Expel me? Because that's the only thing that's going to silence me, isn't it? Mr. Dunley's eyes flickered, but he didn't respond right away. His gaze shifted to the secretary behind him, who gave him a silent nod. It was clear that this wasn't just a disciplinary meeting, it was something else. Mia wasn't just a student anymore. She had become the embodiment of everything they were afraid to confront. You've caused significant disruption, Mr. Dunley said slowly, choosing his words carefully. This school prides itself on creating an environment of respect and inclusivity. But your actions, your post, have undermined that. You need to understand that there are consequences to speaking out. Mia wanted to scream. She wanted to stand up and tell him that it wasn't about her. This wasn't about her needing to apologize. It was about the years of abuse and silence that had finally reached their breaking point. But she didn't. She simply leaned back in her chair and looked him in the eye. I'm not sorry for speaking out, she said, her voice calm but unwavering. If you want to punish me, do it. If you want to silence me, go ahead. But I won't apologize for being who I am. I won't apologize for demanding the same respect everyone else gets. Mr. Dunley stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher her resolve. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh and stood up from behind his desk. Mia, he said, his voice softer now, though still filled with the weight of his authority. You're putting us all in a difficult position, but we can't ignore what's happening. I know, Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you'll try to, won't you? Just like everyone else, just like the driver, just like the kids in the lunchroom. He didn't respond. He couldn't. The truth was too much for him to face. When Mia walked out of Mr. Dunley's office, she didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel vindicated. What she felt was a deep exhaustion, as though the weight of the world was bearing down on her more heavily than ever before. The stares, the whispers, the threats, they had all become too much. As she walked through the hallways, she realized that the worst part wasn't the people who hated her. The worst part was the people who didn't care enough to do anything, the ones who stood by, letting the injustice continue, because it didn't affect them. Mia stepped outside, her breath visible in the cool air. The world seemed darker now, but she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She had learned something important. Fear didn't have to stop her. It didn't have to define her. And when she looked up, she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A group of students gathered near the front steps of the school. They weren't laughing. They weren't mocking her. They were watching her stand. One of them stepped forward. It was Lauren, the girl who had apologized to her earlier. I'm sorry, Lauren said, her voice quiet but steady. I was wrong. I didn't understand, but I do now. Mia looked at Lauren, the weight of the past few days pressing down on her, but she felt something shift inside her. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. She nodded slowly. Thank you, Mia said softly, her voice breaking the silence between them. But we have a lot of work to do. Lauren smiled faintly. We're ready to help. And for the first time in days, Mia didn't feel so alone. The fight wasn't over, but it was clear that something was starting to change. The storm was far from over. But Mia had learned something important. Sometimes you have to stand in the middle of it and let it rage, because when it passes, you'll be the one still standing. The next few weeks felt like a battleground. Mia had hoped things might settle down, that the storm of attention would eventually pass. But the world seemed to be in perpetual motion, spiraling further away from any semblance of peace. Her actions had set off a chain reaction, and now she was stuck in the middle of it. The school had tried to silence her by pretending the issue would fade, but it didn't. The local news outlets kept calling. There were more interviews, more headlines, more experts offering their opinions on how Mia's actions were dividing the community. It wasn't just about the bus anymore. Now, it was a referendum on race, class, and privilege, a subject everyone seemed willing to discuss, but only if they could do so from a distance, only if they could avoid looking in the mirror. It wasn't the media attention that bothered her the most. It was the way people had begun to look at her. The way the familiar faces at school, the ones she had known for years, now seemed to regard her with a mixture of fear, disdain, and resentment. People no longer saw her as a classmate, a peer. They saw her as a threat. A reminder that some people weren't willing to stay silent, that some people refused to sit in the back and let the world tell them who they were allowed to be. Mia had always known what it was like to be invisible. But now, she knew what it was like to be seen, and to have that visibility used against her. The tension at school reached a boiling point one Tuesday morning when Mia walked into history class. She'd been dreading this class for days. Every time she entered the room, she could feel the air shift, the uneasy silence that followed her. It wasn't just the students anymore. It was the teachers too. Mr. Harrington, who had always been one of the more open-minded teachers, had been distant with her ever since the assembly. He avoided making eye contact and seemed eager to move on from any topic that might make people uncomfortable. But today, things were different. As Mia walked in, she noticed that several students had gathered near the back of the room, huddled together in low conversation. She didn't want to make eye contact, didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing how uncomfortable she was. But as she sat down, she overheard snippets of their conversation. "Can you believe she's still here?" one girl whispered, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "I thought they were going to expel her," another responded, voice laced with a mix of disbelief and disgust. "But I guess she's too important, huh? Too much of a symbol now." Mia clenched her fists under the table, the words cutting through her like a blade. It wasn't the first time she had heard this kind of thing, but hearing it here in this classroom felt like the final blow. She didn't belong here anymore. She wasn't just another student. She was an issue, a problem they had to tolerate, but not respect. She felt a shift in the room when Mr. Harrington entered. His eyes flicked to Mia briefly before he turned away and started the lesson. He didn't say a word about the incident, didn't address the class like he had done during the assembly. He simply launched into his lesson, his voice monotone and disengaged. Mia's hands trembled as she opened her notebook. She wasn't sure if it was from the anger or the frustration, but she couldn't concentrate. Every word he said felt hollow, as if it didn't matter anymore. Nothing felt real. Not this class. Not the world outside. Not the people who had turned their backs on her. By the end of the day, the whispers had followed her to her locker and then to the parking lot. Mia was used to it by now. The constant hum of judgment, the way people moved out of her way, as if they were afraid to catch the disease of her defiance. But today, something felt different. It wasn't just the usual crowd. This time, the crowd was larger. There were more students, more of them staring at her like she was an experiment they were studying. As she reached for her bag, she heard a voice behind her. "Mia, right?" It was Sarah, one of the girls who had been part of the group that had ignored her at lunch weeks ago. Sarah had always been the nice one, the one who smiled and said hello in the halls. But now, her voice was laced with something else. Mia turned, bracing herself for whatever came next. "You're causing a lot of problems, you know," Sarah continued, her words slow, deliberate. "People are talking about you. Parents are calling the school. Teachers are worried. You've become a distraction." Sarah's eyes flickered with something more than concern. There was something else there, something Mia couldn't quite place. "I'm not the problem here," Mia shot back, her voice tight with anger. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask to be made an example of. I just want to go to school without being treated like I'm invisible." Sarah raised an eyebrow, her lip curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You can't expect everyone to just roll over for you because of your little post. People like you." She paused. the words hanging in the air like poison. You're not supposed to make waves. You're supposed to stay in your place. Mia's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't even the insult itself. It was the casual way Sarah had said it, the tone that was laced with entitlement. It was like Sarah believed deep down that she had every right to say it, that Mia was just a problem, just an inconvenience to be tolerated. I don't care about staying in my place, Mia said, her voice hardening. You can keep thinking that, but I'm not going anywhere. I'm not apologizing for being who I am. Sarah shook her head and walked away, but the damage was done. The sting of her words still burned as Mia stood there, trying to steady her breathing. It wasn't just Sarah, it was everyone. They had seen Mia's courage as a challenge, a threat to the way things had always been. Later that night, Mia couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of the day pressing down on her. Her phone buzzed with messages, more support, more hate. She had become a target not just at school but online. Some people praised her bravery, others called her names, questioned her intentions, told her to go back to where she came from. But the worst part wasn't the insults, it was the silence from the people who claimed to care about her. The people who were supposed to be her allies, who had promised to support her. Where were they now? The world felt like it was closing in on her. She opened her social media app, scrolling through the comments. It wasn't just the racists or the trolls anymore. Now, it was people she knew. People who had been in her life. People who had smiled at her and told her she was going to do great things. Now, those same people were the ones telling her she had gone too far. One comment stood out. It was from someone who had been her friend since middle school, a girl named Cara. You're making everything so much worse. You think this is going to fix anything? You think they're going to respect you just because you're being loud? You're ruining your future. Mia stared at the words, her fingers trembling as she hovered over the keyboard. She had never expected Cara to be one of the people who would turn on her. She'd always been one of the good ones, or so Mia had thought. But now Mia realized something important. Cara, like everyone else, was afraid. Afraid of what would happen if they had to face the uncomfortable truths. Afraid of what would happen if they had to acknowledge the systems that kept them safe at the expense of people like Mia. Mia took a deep breath and typed a response. I'm not going to stay silent just to make you feel comfortable. I won't apologize for standing up for myself. If you can't respect that, then maybe it's time we stop pretending we're friends. She hit send, her heart racing as the message went through. For a moment, she stared at the screen, wondering if she had gone too far. But then the response came. Cara didn't apologize. She didn't back down. Instead, she simply unfollowed Mia. And Mia realized, as the quiet rejection sank in, that this was the price of standing up. This was the price of demanding dignity. Some people would never understand. Some people would never be willing to see her as human, as equal. But that wasn't her problem. It was theirs. The next morning, Mia stepped into school, feeling like the weight of the world was on her shoulders. But this time, she wasn't walking with her head down. She wasn't shrinking back. She was walking taller. She was walking with purpose. The whispers still followed her. The glances still stung. But she didn't care anymore. She had found something stronger than fear, something more powerful than the hate that people tried to throw at her. She was finally starting to understand. Standing up for what's right doesn't come without a price. But that price wasn't as high as living in silence. And Mia was done living in silence. She was ready for whatever came next. Mia stood at the edge of the school parking lot, her backpack slung over one shoulder, the weight of her decisions settling heavily in her chest. It had been months since the bus incident, and in that time, she had become something of a symbol. Not for what she wanted, but for what others wanted to project onto her. To some, she was a hero. To others, she was a troublemaker. A person who had gone too far and disrupted the fragile peace they so dearly clung to. It didn't matter how many times she told herself that she was doing the right thing, that this was about more than just her. It still hurt. It hurt in ways she couldn't put into words. The world had always looked at her through a different lens, one that distorted her image to fit their narratives. But now, it wasn't just the looks. It was the direct attacks. The comments on her social media, the whispers in the halls, the way people avoided her, as if they were afraid that simply standing near her would contaminate them. The silence was deafening. She had expected the hate, the mockery, but the silence. It gnawed at her in ways she couldn't describe. People didn't want to engage. They didn't want to be part of the conversation because it made them uncomfortable. It was easier to pretend it wasn't happening, easier to let the world stay the same, as if Mia's voice hadn't disrupted it. But she hadn't come this far to let silence win. She hadn't made the decision to speak out just to fade back into the background. Today, something had shifted in her. She wasn't going to hide anymore. She wasn't going to play their game of silence and compliance. She had spoken her truth, and whether they wanted to hear it or not, she wasn't going to let them take that from her. It happened during lunch. The cafeteria was buzzing with the usual noise of students chatting, laughing, and rushing to finish their meals before the bell rang. But today, it felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, an undercurrent of tension that Mia could feel in every step. She sat alone, as she had for weeks now, her tray untouched, her thoughts far away from the conversation happening around her. Her mind was focused on what came next. The decision she had made that morning to take the final step, to expose the truth, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been affected by the things she had endured. And then, it came. Mia hadn't noticed the group of boys approaching until they were standing in front of her. It was the same group from a few weeks ago, the ones who had laughed at her, mocked her for standing up, the ones who had whispered behind her back, spreading rumors and lies. But now, they were standing in front of her, and Mia could see the sneers in their eyes, the mockery written all over their faces. "Look who's still here," one of them said, his voice dripping with venom. "I thought you'd be gone by now, but you're still acting like you're some kind of hero." Mia stood up, her hands shaking but her heart steady. She wasn't going to let them see her flinch, not anymore. "I'm not a hero," she said, her voice cold but steady. "I'm just someone who won't stay silent anymore. Maybe you should try it sometime." The boy scoffed, stepping closer. "You think you can just shout and make everything better? You think people are going to respect you because you wrote some little post online?" Mia didn't back down. "It's not just about the post. It's about respect. You don't understand that, do you?" He laughed bitterly, the sound cutting through her like a knife. "Respect? You're not getting any respect. You're just some angry little girl who thinks she's entitled to everything. You really think people care about you? You're just another loudmouth who needs to be put in her place." Mia's heart pounded in her chest, the blood rushing to her ears. She could feel the sting of their words, the hurt that they tried to mask as superiority. But she wasn't going to let them break her. She wasn't going to let them see how much it hurt. "You don't get it," she said, her voice quiet but filled with defiance. "You think you can belittle me, humiliate me, just because I'm standing up for myself? Well, I'm done letting people like you make me feel small. I'm done letting people like you get away with it." The boy stepped forward, his face inches from hers. "You think this is over? You think people are going to rally behind you? No one cares about your little cause you're just an embarrassment." The words hit her like a punch to the gut, but Mia didn't look away. She didn't flinch. "You're wrong," she said, her voice firm. "You're wrong about me, and you're wrong about everyone else who's been told to stay quiet. The world is changing, and people like me, people like us, we're not going to let you decide our worth anymore." A tense silence hung in the air. The boy looked at her for a long moment, his eyes narrowing as if trying to figure her out. But he didn't have time to say anything else before a voice broke through the tension. "Is there a problem here?" It was Lauren. She had been standing off to the side, watching the confrontation unfold, and now she stepped forward, her stance firm. Mia hadn't expected her to step in, not like this, but Lauren stood next to her, her eyes locking with the boy's in a silent but powerful show of solidarity. The boy sneered at her. "This doesn't concern you, Lauren." "I think it does," Lauren said, her voice strong. "You don't get to treat people like that, not here, not ever." The boy hesitated, his gaze flickering between Mia and Lauren. He looked like he was about to say something, but in the end he didn't. He simply turned on his heel and walked away, his friends trailing behind him, muttering under their breath. Mia stood there, breathing heavily, feeling the adrenaline slowly ebb away. She hadn't expected Lauren to step in, but it was more than just Lauren standing up for her. It was the realization that she wasn't fighting alone anymore, that maybe, just maybe, the world was starting to listen. Lauren turned to her and smiled, though it was tinged with uncertainty. "You okay?" Mia nodded, still catching her breath. Yeah, thanks, Lauren shrugged. I couldn't just stand there and let them do that. We're all in this together, right? Mia smiled back, a sense of warmth spreading through her chest. Yeah, we are. That afternoon, the news of what had happened in the cafeteria spread quickly. Some students were shocked, others were impressed, but no one could ignore it. Mia had done something no one thought possible. She had stood up, not just for herself, but for everyone who had been silenced. She had turned the tables, showing that she wasn't just a victim, but a force to be reckoned with. The days that followed were a mix of backlash and support. There were still the racists, the ones who wanted to see her fail, the ones who thought she was just stirring the pot. But there were also the ones who saw her for what she truly was, someone brave enough to challenge the system, to stand up against the things that had been wrong for so long. Mia kept pushing forward. She started to find allies in unexpected places. Some of her classmates, who had previously been indifferent, now offered their support. Some shared stories of their own struggles, their own moments of feeling less than because of their race, their gender, or their background. They started to understand what Mia had been trying to say all along. And Mia, she began to feel a sense of peace she hadn't felt in a long time. The world hadn't changed overnight. The road ahead was still long, still filled with obstacles, but she wasn't alone anymore. She had found her voice. And now, she was ready to help others find theirs. It wasn't just about the fight for equality anymore. It was about solidarity. It was about standing together, about making sure no one ever felt invisible again. And Mia knew, deep down, that this was just the beginning. The storm wasn't over, but it was finally beginning to break. We'd love to hear what you think about Mia's journey. How did this story resonate with you? Have you ever experienced something similar in your life? Your thoughts and experiences matter to us deeply, and we truly appreciate each and every one of you who takes the time to listen and engage. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing and leaving a like. It helps us bring more content to you, and we would love for you to stay with us for the next chapter of these journeys. We hope you have a great day ahead, and thank you for being here. If you listened all the way to the end, please drop the phrase, "I will no longer be silent" in the comments, so we know you've made it to the finish line with us.